Thank you for coming. This project is actually started because many of the researchers were asking me how to use the historical census data in GIS. And I wanted to understand myself better how actually can be used. And in order to understand, I also wanted to understand the methodology to do this one. And because of this, I decided to do a project myself to understand everything. So the story that I'm going to tell is the methodology and workflow that I've found can be implemented. So first thing, the question that I wanted to ask is what method and workflows are involved in actually linking the historical population data to individual household. So census data is very, very rich. And also trying to figure out is how easy, how difficult it is to build a historical geocoding database itself. And then also trying to figure out if you wanted to build this, what sort of resources you really need, what sort of map you really need. And the final question that I wanted to find out is, if I develop a historical geocoding database, can I use this database, geocoding database, to geocode historical address or not? So those are the things that I wanted to test myself. So in order to test this one, I decided to pick Princeton, because Princeton provides a unique set of environment. In the sense, Princeton is divided into two municipalities. One is Princeton Borough, another is Princeton Township. And Princeton Borough resembles urban America because all of the houses does have a street and house number. Whereas Princeton Township, very few have a house number, and majority do not have a house number, and that represents the rural America. So in order to do this one, I wanted to figure out how it can be worked out. And also at the same time, since I live in Princeton, it'll be much easier for me to figure out the different histories and the resources. So therefore, I decided to pick Princeton to do this work. So little history behind this. By law, United States has to count population every 10 years, 100. And at the same time, after 72 years, all those records need to be released to the public. And very detailed, very informative, the records are released. And the records are actually scanned by the National Archive and Record, and they are made accessible to the public. But the Church of Latter-day Saints, what they have done is they collected all of those things and they have transcribed and create the database and sell to different libraries. So I also wanted to test this thing to see how good their data set is and trying to figure out. All right, so this is the interface of ancestry database itself, and it's a very simple interface and very easy to use. So I picked 1900. The reason I picked 1900 is because when I try to look at the Princeton, earlier ones, they don't have a house number. And therefore, I really cannot test that methodology and workflow. So because of that, I picked 1900. And also, it comes really nice because it's the turn of the century. So it's a very simple interface, state, county, and township. And at that time, the Princeton was divided into 3 enumeration districts. And so what you can get is pick one enumeration district, and you get this census, the form, enumeration form. And each of these forms has these detailed 28 questions we ask. And what I'm interested in is in a circle part. That is the location. And I wanted to see how location really works. So location, as you can see in the cities, they have a street, they have a house number. And another thing that really helps me is the first one, which is the number of dwelling houses in the order of visitation. So it tells you how the enumerator worked from one house, another house, collecting the record. That helps you in guessing the location if you really cannot figure out, especially in the rural area. So this is what it works. And when you open this one, and there's an option to actually show the spreadsheet, and spreadsheet comes with what you call 50 records. And it's a manual process. You copy all of those things, and then what you do is you put an Excel spreadsheet. And here what I try to do is not only just copy an Excel spreadsheet as I have done it, but also at the same time, what I did was I put the sheet numbers and the enumeration district number so that it'll help me to verify it later on when I go back and forth, checking individual, all of them. So now the first things, since I have done all of those things, then I have to figure out is the maps that I need in order to create a historical location-based database. So the borough is a more urban area, so it's fairly easy to find a really nice map. So I'm trying to find exact map, but I couldn't find the 1900 maps, so I have to use the 3 different maps in order to do it. And why 3 different maps? I'll tell you the story behind this. This map was done in 1898 purposely to do this, to draw a house numbering system. And so this is really handy for me to figure out. However, if I try to use this one, there are some issues too. And then there's another one, which is well-known Sanborn map. But Sanborn map doesn't cover whole Princeton borough. Although there are 12 sheets, it doesn't cover. Then I have to go and use this one, which covers whole Princeton borough with house number, but at the same time, house number doesn't correspond exactly with the 1900 census. So this is what you will find. It's really nice, detailed property information. And Grover Cleveland used to live in Princeton. So you know the Grover Cleveland, right? The President of the United States. Anyway, his property is there. So the second part is the Princeton Township, which resemble the rural America. And for there, this is a very tough thing because you really don't find a really neat map. So what sort of map you really want to use it? There is a property map of many American cities and towns and rural areas. So I try to find that property map, and that's the Mercer County is where Princeton is located, and there is a really nice Princeton map there. And then in order to complement that one, I also look for a tax map, and I try to ask the township, and the township has the 1920 tax map. And so I use that as a reference, but also at the same time, 1930 aerial photograph of whole New Jersey, I try to use to check it, different things, especially in the rural area. So this is the 1903 Mercer County map, and this is a property map. You can see fairly detailed. You can see individual houses and owner of individual house. So this is the property map, and this is the tax map that you will see. Their own cadastral boundary and who owns them, and this will really help in checking somebody's name, property, all of those things. So this is another one, aerial photograph. So once you have all of those things, then what you do is start building the database. Now, building the database is not that easy in a sense, because what I have to do is I really cannot do a modern way of building what you call geocoding services, because address doesn't really correspond properly. So I have to go through individual one of them and trying to find out where they are located, and then try to create a points. And all of those points, I just leave it like this because they address all of those things. And then after you do this part, what you have to do is, as examples that I've given, for example, Woodrow Wilson, who used to live in the 50 Library Place in 1900, the same house have a different address now. So therefore, you really cannot do this one. Historically, you really have to use historical data sets. So while trying to match it, I see a lot of transcription errors, and then trying to figure out how to fix this. And the fixing individual really helps me to correct all of these sort of problems that I find it. So this is the one good example, transcription error that you can find it. And this is another good example of transcription error. The person's name up there was transcribed wrongly, and then you can verify this on a map, and then also you can verify it on the text map. So you can figure out the spelling mistakes also there. Beside this also, the census taker also made a mistake. So for example, this professor who used to live, Princeton professor who used to live in a 4th Prospect Avenue, but it was listed as living in a Washington, 4th Washington Road. And 4th Washington doesn't exist in Princeton that I know. So I was trying to figure out how this thing has happened. So I have to went back and used the Princeton University catalog and try to see whether his address consistently says 4 Prospect Avenue or not. And it says 4 Prospect Avenue. And that tells me that there is an issue. And so those type of the things I have to do in order to correct a lot of stuff. So once the correction is done, then based on the listing of the house number, street number, then you start creating a points, all the points just like this. Now, you will see that I have to use different maps in order to do this one. The address, see this one, in Sanborn it says house number 25, but it's not really house number 25. It's according to a 1900 census, it says it's 27. So I have to do these sort of corrections in order to create this historical database. And same thing apply if you use the Sanborn map, 1800 and 1895, the housing numbers are different totally. So you really cannot use on one. You really have to rely on the census itself and then the time how the house were numbered. You really cannot use just blindly one map. So once that is done, all those data set, I have to make a geocoding database. And in order to make a geocoding database, I use a single house address locator database. And this could be used in geocoding all the census data that has address to actual location and tie them everything. So that's what I try to do. Now, in the Princeton Township, which is the rural one, which is a bit difficult, because then I have to go through each of these streets and then their person's name. If the person owns a property, it's very easy to tie it. If the person doesn't own the property, is renting, then it's difficult. Then what you try to use is visitation numbers and trying to figure out. And so because of this, I have to do these sort of stuff. So if you see a blue dot, that means it's approximate, the guesswork, based on aerial photograph, based on the property, and then you guessed based on the visitation. So you build a database, and this database is nothing to do with address. This database has a unique identifier. And that unique identifier you tie to the census data and then later on join them together. And that's what you do it. And in that way, you can create a data set like this. And when I make this data available to the public will know which are actual location and which are proximate location. So they can verify them. And not only this, they will find all the sheet numbers and enumeration district numbers so that they are fairly confident what they are trying to do. So in 1900, there is no enumeration district boundary in Princeton. So once you geocoded them, you will find them, the boundary can be drawn very easily. Not only this, you will also find that the people who are taking a census, they also came from individual districts. And all these 3 different census takers are coming from their own individual districts. And so for final analysis, that's what I found. The analysis is, this is what you will find at Princeton in the early 20th century, have roughly 4,800 people, and 8-fold increase in the what do you call 21st century, I would say. And now here is another interesting thing that I found. In 1900, they are around 20.6% of the populations are black, whereas in 2000, that was gone down to 5%. Almost 6%, whereas the white population is remained more or less same. And 79% in 1900, and 2000 it was 800. So another thing in the census that you will find is they will census provide you the race-related information, black, white, Chinese, Japanese, and all of those things. And when you plot them, you will see a really interesting pattern. You will try to find it. So this is the black population location, concentrated in one particular area in Princeton. Still is dominated by this in Princeton itself. And Princeton also attracts a large immigrant population, and immigrant populations, but they are not really concentrated in one particular area. As you can see it here, these are the United States born and immigrant population, and the immigrant population where they're coming from, Ireland, Germany, England, Scotland, and so on and so forth. But you will notice that nobody from Spain or Portuguese came to Princeton. Maybe they're going to South America, I guess. So these are non-European countries, immigrants to the United States. This is the general distribution of different ethnic, the groups coming from immigrant population coming to Princeton. And now the final thing that I want to test is the historical geodatabase that I've built, whether it can be used, whether it can be used in geocoding other historical addresses. So in order to do this one, I did the business directory of 1900 of Princeton, and it's like this. You scan them, you OCR them, you build the database, and then you geocode it. It matches really well. So if you're going to do your historical location database that you're going to build, that database that you're going to build will be helpful in geocoding historical address really well. Not only this, what it'll help you is it also help you to check other things. For example, in the census, the occupation wasn't there in certain places, whereas in business directory, you find the occupation. So you can link them easily. So that's another one, you can find it. And I don't have a time. And what I decided to do was I quickly tried to build a story map for this for somebody who may be interested. This is a short URL. And story map is, let's see, hopefully if I have a time, I'll just quickly show you how the story map might look like. And story map may look like this quickly. And so you can go through this and gives you each one of them story map and description of different things. That's what I have. Thank you so much. Any questions?
Yeah,
sure.
So in choosing where, you talked about how you chose where to place the points to have it be the most accurate with the geocoding, and then two, if people were to do this sort of nationwide, where every area the house number system is so different, how do you envision that?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. The geocoding part was, especially in the places where there is a house number, it's relatively easy to do it, but you have to make sure is address really matches with the house number. Because as I showed you the example, sometimes looks like you have the right map, it really doesn't match it. So what I did was not only try to put after you georeference, put the points, but the points are tested on the present locations that I've tested. Actual house that you tested, or the lot that I've tested. So that one I've done. If you wanted to do the whole United States, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. You can see this particular project that I decided to do last Christmas vacation time, because I wanted to finish this 10 days. I locked my office and I started from scratch to trying to figure out exactly how everything works so that I have a better understanding of problems, challenges, and possibilities. So decided to do all of them together and trying to figure out so that if somebody asks me a question, I have a right answer. So that's what I tried to do.
When you geocoded, were they accurate, when you checked them?
Yeah, if you have built proper location, the geocoding really works really well, really well. Yep, and so then you will become you have a historical geocoding services with you. Yes, sure. So that's the tricky part. Princeton also have renumbering systems, and that was one of the examples that I was giving you, Woodrow Wilson's house, which was a 50 library place. Now it's 82. So what you try to do is you use the historical map. You use the historical map and then go through checking whether that number has changed or not. And in order to do this one, I don't use one map, I use few maps to check it. It's a tedious work, but once you build it, the resources will be really helpful later on. Last, but do you have a time? No, I don't have time. Sorry, I don't have a time. Thank you so much.